Hello, busy dads and busy people everywhere. Before I launch into my final session of this training week, I want to share with all of you a little bit of the context of my training as it has been so far this month and as I intend to continue it into the new year. When my wife and I and my family moved from the southwest of America in San Diego up here to the northeast about 3 years ago, as we were packing our bags and jettisoning our possessions, trying to really streamline for the move, we agreed that we wouldn't take our scales with us. That worked for me. I was deep enough into the game that I could tell by all kinds of just visual cues where I was at. For a couple of years at that point, I had been living quite comfortably within a certain weight range, about 160 pounds at the low end and about 168 at the high end. I would always hover in that range. If I was getting towards the higher end, I'd pull back a bit. I'd start to get nicely towards the low end, and then something would happen and I'd have 2 or 3 weeks of drifting a little bit, and then I'd pull back. I lived in that range for a couple of years, and I felt pretty confident that I could continue to live in that range without relying on the scales. It went pretty well. Periodically, when we returned to England, I would step on my parents' scales when we were visiting them just to have a quick check, and sure enough, I would always land somewhere in that weight range. But I started to drift quite a bit towards the end of last year. You might have picked up from my videos, there was a lot of the kinds of stress that it's hard to absorb pressing down on the family during that time. And I hid, and I drifted. My training became an afterthought. Many of my sessions were mediocre. And I started chaining together 7 out of 10 eating weeks. Just losing myself a little bit and hiding in food. Nothing crazy, but a kind of irresponsible form of eating that, if you're watching this video, there's every chance you're familiar with. This is what I would have done with alcohol in the past. I'm very glad it was food and not alcohol that I was abusing, but abusing it I was. Still, I was complacent. I thought, I can live in that range. I've got such a fast metabolism. I'm such an athletic guy. I can get away with it. Well, I was wrong. I could tell from my physique I was squinting, trying to catch sight of my muscles, but they weren't really quite there when I had my shower in the morning. I could tell that I had fallen out of shape a little bit, but I got a very, very, very nasty shock when I stood on the scales at my parents' house and saw 81 kilograms, way, way, way out of the range that I had been living in. And so I experienced it as just a shock to the system and as a wake-up call. And since that day, I have been very single-minded in returning to my place of flourishing. I cannot be walking around heavy, feeling imprisoned in my body. I've been there. I walked around at 105 kilograms in my mid-20s, in what should have been the flower of my youth. I felt imprisoned in this sluggish body. I don't want even the vaguest hint of that way of being. I want to be light on my feet. I want to be springy. I want to be agile. I want to be active and powerful. Something had to change. Now, that has meant a renewal of all of the practices, all of the fundamental practices, the cold water, training hard. It has meant several other things that I want to talk about in future videos. I'm really excited to share with you some of the things I've been doing. But one of the things it has meant is a real cleansing around nutrition for me. At the moment, all I want is to eat sparingly and to eat well. January is a time of austerity, and my spirit craves it. And so what's funny is, last year, every day was a losing battle to try and restrict myself to 2,500 calories. Today, I struggle to eat 2,000. For whatever reason, my appetite, my inclinations, my approach to food has changed. I enjoy my food more than ever, and yet I eat less of it. So that puts me in a pretty steep calorie deficit, and I don't have those scales here, but my sense is that I'm getting back to my home getting back into peak shape. Now I know a lot of guys who, like me, are trying either to return or for the first time to get to that place where their bodies are lean and strong and powerful. And very often the messaging I hear from them, what they're telling themselves and what they're telling me, is that until they get to peak shape, until they lose this weight, they're just going to put the training on maintenance mode. Because after all, you're in a calorie deficit and your glycogen is depleted. And how could you possibly be hitting PRs when your glycogen is depleted? And listen to this way of talking. Just listen to it. Listen to the way it underestimates the power of the mind, the power of the will. Listen to the excuses it's making ahead of time. Listen to the way it is turning the training practice into a place of languishing instead of flourishing. That's no way to live. I have been training properly again in the last couple of weeks, especially this week. And that is because I am bringing devotion and attention and purpose to my training sessions. Not because my glycogen stores are topped up. They are nicely depleted, and perhaps you can't live like this year round. But in a period of intensity, in a blizzard, I recommend that you summon your intensity into every endeavor in your life. Don't have a single endeavor where you say, I'm going to autopilot this one, and especially not your training. So my friends, sermon over. But with all of that said, it's my final session of what has been so far a strong training week. One that I'm fairly proud of. I'm going to end with the best session of the week. 140 Navy SEALs are coming your way right now. Excuse the heating in my house. It's a distraction. Doesn't matter. Down. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 3. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
That one 40. 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. 1, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. 3, 2, 4, 6, 7, 8, 9. 60. 7, 12, 4, 6, 7, 8. Well, not quite 140. It was either 138 or 139. I'm not sure if I miscounted and skipped a rep early on, and so around about the 40 mark I deducted one of my counts. I think that was right, in which case it was 138. If not, it was 139. You know, a wave of nausea came over me there, and panic at around the 50 rep mark. I really didn't know what to do. And it was pretty soon after that I found a way of staying in, but I had hoped to ration out the extra 5 reps that I had in my back pocket from racing the clock at the start. And in the end I took all but one of them at around the 80 rep mark, and that for me felt like an admission of defeat, but I was able to rally. And even though in my mind up until that point I'd been saying, you know, you've got to do all kinds of deals with the devil just to hold for 5 reps, this time I felt equal to the prospect of 60. No more racing the clock, so when it came around, take the rep. And I started to switch my focus from the number of reps I completed to how much time I had left. This pacing, I know I can hold it for 5 minutes. So I bargained with myself to get to the 5-minute mark. And then, once again, to get to the 4-minute mark before I gave up the one final rep that I had in reserve and fell in with the clock. And it was just a momentary lapse of concentration, and I lost a rep, and then I lost one more. And that's frustrating, because I know the chase was on and I was equal to it, but it scared me. Even so, I am proud of the way I stayed in that session and the way I chased, and it is a massive, massive step forward. Last week I was struggling to hit 122. Today it was 138, and it felt great. A full weekend of replenishment ahead now. Loving the people around me and serving them. There's no replenishment like it. So my friends, honour your practice and serve the people who depend on you. And have a wonderful, joyful weekend. I will see you next week.